8 days ago, I published a video about Starfield, about AMD, and about the FSR technology, and about hope. Hope that AMD's newest upgraded and enhanced version of FSR, the once delayed FSR 3.0, could save Starfield from its 30 FPS life on Xbox consoles. See, we already knew FSR 3.0 was bringing with it a brand new technology for AMD called Fidelity FX Super Resolution 3 Fluid Motion, or just FSR Fluid Motion for short, I guess. It's a performance-enhancing trick designed to rival NVIDIA's DLSS 3's frame generation trick, which was heavily advertised alongside and linked to Cyberpunk's path tracing update. And in theory, that meant FSR 3.0, applied to Starfield on Xbox specifically, could double effective perceived frame rates and take us to 60 FPS, or what feels like 60 at least. And we'd all be happy and we could stop having the discourse. The good news is, AMD have now officially taken the wraps off and detailed FSR 3.0 during their announcements at Gamescom. And it looks pretty sweet, on paper. The bad news is, it seems it might not save Starfield from 30 FPS on Xbox after all, for two entirely separate but very concerning reasons. One of which might change, the other one's a bit tricky. Hello again, I am Blunty, and for those of you who are regulars around here and have heard the plight of my gaming PC falling over and dying just a few weeks before Starfield lands, I can now confirm, happily, a new build will rise from its ashes, a sponsored build, a powerful build. Starting early next week, there's some videos coming all about it, and after that, I'll be showing you Starfield at its very best, 4K, maxed out, no compromises, full glory, full PC master race, shining, sparkling, wonderful, godlike, extraordinary. I'm running out of adjectives. So stay tuned for that, thumbs up, bell, etc. And comment down below for me, by the way, what platform you are planning to be playing Starfield on, Series X, Series S, or PC, and what you expect to get from Starfield under your PC specs. Think you're going to be playing at 1080p, 1440p, 4K, medium specs, high specs, extreme, ultra? So let's get down to brass tacks, FSR 3.0. As I mentioned in my original coverage, just like with previous versions of FSR, AMD have made sure to make it hardware agnostic. It will work on AMD hardware, of course. It'll also work on NVIDIA. It will probably also work on Intel GPUs just fine, although AMD haven't confirmed that specifically yet. Basically, as long as your GPU is relatively modern, you'll be fine. Unlike NVIDIA's DLSS 3.0's frame generation trick, which is hardware restricted and only works on their brandy newest GeForce RTX 40 series cards. FSR 3.0 and its fluid motion frame generation trick will of course work on the latest Radeon RX 7000 series cards, of which two new entries were also just announced, targeting the high middle range gamers who want maxed out 1440p gaming, so that's also pretty exciting, but not the point of this video. But FSR 3.0 will also work great on RX 6000 series cards from AMD, or RTX 40 series cards, or RTX 30 series cards, or RTX 20 series cards. And while FSR in general will work on even older cards, there is a limit to AMD's recommendations on using the frame generation stuff specifically, which reaches down to the 20 series NVIDIA cards and their own RX 5700 GPU. Now, the RX 5000 series cards was the first appearance of AMD's newest GPU architecture called RDNA, and we're up to RDNA 4 right now with the latest 7000 series cards. And the Xbox Series X and Series S, as well as the PlayStation 5 actually, ride on an APU built with RDNA 2 architecture. Meaning, as I spoke about in my other video, FSR 3.0 will indeed happily work on Xbox Series consoles. To give you a rough equivalent, the Series X has 52 RDNA 2 compute cores, which is 8 less than the Radeon RX 6800's count of 60 CUs. Which all means the Series X easily falls within the supported recommendation hardware specs, where FSR 3 with super resolution upscaling and frame generation running simultaneously is going to be happy, according to AMD. Now, given all of that, I was actually a bit stunned to see that Starfield is not being held up as the flagship title for FSR 3.0's launch. Instead, it is, get this, Forspoken. Forspoken of all goddamn things. The absolute turd of a game that flopped hard upon release and nobody has spoken about since because nobody gives a shit. The larger slate of advertised supported titles for FSR 3.0's release includes some old, some new, some good, some bad, some unreleased stuff which we don't know whether it's good or bad yet. But Starfield, specifically, is nowhere to be seen. Not a mention, not a whisper, nothing. Baffling. It may, as I indeed also predicted in my other video, be that FSR 3.0 for Starfield will arrive shortly after launch, in a patch. Maybe there's still some last-minute tuning they're doing. Maybe Bethesda is a little bit gun-shy about swapping in a new technology over the proven FSR 2, which of course they will have been developing with for quite some time now, and just don't want to switch boats this close to launch, just in case it does something unpredictable to the creaking fetid bones of that woefully ancient creation engine that Starfield runs upon. Maybe they just want a little more testing time with the finalized FSR 3.0 before pushing it out with Starfield, or at least announcing that people can expect it to come. FSR 3.0 was already delayed, was originally slated to arrive much earlier this year, so maybe that delay pushed back Bethesda's testing with it as well, or confidence in it. Bethesda and Xbox really need Starfield to have a very solid launch, free as possible from the catastrophes and embarrassments of bugs and performance issues and whatnot that all too many games suffer under these days, and in particular Bethesda have quite an awful reputation of, so maybe they're just a little shy on FSR 3.0 right now. As it stands, even the confirmed games won't have FSR 3.0 immediately. AMD only commits to the first games expected to add support for AMD FSR 3 are Forspoken and Immortals of Avium in early fall. So maybe all this is just Bethesda waiting to be 100% sure they can deliver FSR 3.0 and it's going to work as expected before they go ahead and promise it's on its way. Or maybe I'm just huffing copium with a hopium chaser. It could never come. Well, not officially anyway, but we'll come back to that. But then we come to problem number 2, and this one might be a deal killer. See, FSR 3 fluid motion could, in theory, easily double a game's frame rate to take a 30 FPS experience to something that, while not true 60 FPS, at least looks and feels a lot closer to 60 than 30. But in a little note on AMD's website, in the blog post announcing and detailing FSR 3.0's abilities, there's a little knee kicker of a caveat. We recommend, they say, always running at a minimum of 60 FPS before frame generation is applied for an optimal and low latency experience. So, for FSR 3.0's frame doubling trick to work well, you already need to be able to reach 60 FPS. Oh no. Oh no. Now, that's not to say it won't work when starting from 30 FPS, for example. They're not going to stop you from trying to use it at 30 FPS. They're only saying that AMD consider the feel that you would get from this, the latency and cessation of input lag, for example, is not the best when doing so. Basically, their new complementary tech, AMD Radeon Anti-Lag Plus, only really works well with higher starting frame rates to compensate for the intrinsic latency you get from, making up frames, generating frames. There is just a latency there you can't avoid because, well, you have to do the math, and math takes time to do. So there's Radeon Anti-Lag Plus to help alleviate that. NVIDIA have a similar thing going on with theirs to, compensate for the lag on their side of things, on their technology as well. But apparently, it just isn't working that well when you're starting at 30. And maybe that is why Starfield was left out. And unfortunately, that might be why Starfield continues to be left out. Indeed, much like how NVIDIA showed off their own frame generation tech with Cyberpunk, where the before sample was just raw performance with no other tricks, the frame generation side was also teamed up with other technologies. AMD too used that example, with Forspoken's stated 53 FPS average on their before sample being a 4K, truly 4K native, ultra-high settings and ray tracing on, but FSR scaling off, compared with the after image, which is 4K non-native, using FSR's upscaling in performance mode, which means the game is actually running at a 2x upscale. Or in more basic terms, it is internally rendering at just 1080p, not 4K, and then upscaling to 4K, and then also using frame generation on top of that. So they're using the upscaling to get above 60 FPS, and then applying the frame doubling stuff to give you that final big fat triple-digit number that looks so impressive in the press-released photo thingies. It's not exactly the most honest way to show off frame generation. And again, Nvidia are exactly as guilty of this as AMD, so, put your pitchforks away. Everybody does this. And to be fair, in the real world, this is in fact how people should and will be using these technologies. They're designed to be used together. That's how people are going to be using them. So demonstrating this way is not dishonest, but it still makes it slightly misleading as an example when you're talking about the frame generation technology specifically and what it's capable of. Now, back to Starfield specifically again. The issue is, Starfield's 30 FPS cap on Xbox Series S and Series X is already using FSR 2.0 upscaling to achieve even that level of performance. So, unlike the Forspoken example, where the native performance was already just below 60 FPS, so it wasn't too hard to get it above that for the frame doubling stuff to work, Starfield is already failing to get to 60 FPS, with the upscaling already working to boost performance, meaning that the frame generation would just be working from that 30 FPS base. But then we come back to Todd Howard's claims that 30 FPS cap is there deliberately for consistency or some other bullcrap, and actually the game can run at much higher frame rates when uncapped, sometimes even at 60, he says. With that in mind, and the fact that Xbox supports variable frame rate refresh monitors, FSR 3.0 could still work very beneficially on Xbox. And all of that is to say nothing of what it could do for PC players, of course, who have far more control over our performance, meaning it's a pretty simple task to get to that 60 FPS minimum ideal and then apply the frame generation for an even smoother feeling game. So even if it's not practical on Xbox, what's stopping you from doing it on PC? I remain confused as to why Starfield is not being used as a flagship for FSR 3.0. I remain hopeful that we'll see it arrive in an update, and if not, its open source nature means it's very likely some enterprising modder will very quickly make it work, on PC at least, even without an official patch. We already saw this happen with Cyberpunk and FSR 2.0. Before the official patch came along for FSR 2.0, we were stuck with the quite poor FSR 1.0 version, and modders came along and went, hey, here's FSR 2.0 by the way, easy peasy, done. So it's relatively likely we might see the same thing happen with FSR 3.0 on PC for Starfield, even if it never gets officially supported. Frankly, it's all a bit disappointing. But lucky me, I am going to have my gaming rig rebuilt in time for Starfield after all, thank goodness, so worries about frame rate caps are just academic rather than practical for me right now, which is a pretty good feeling, but still, I am an empathetic person. I have much empathy for console players, and especially those who, like me, are rather sensitive to motion sickness when you combine first-person games, console-restricted field of view, and 30 FPS all together in a mixing pot. It's a pretty unpleasant experience for me personally, and I'm not alone in that, so much sympathy for the people who are hoping FSR 3.0 could save you from that, at least at launch. Doesn't seem like it's going to happen. Wish I had better news for you all. In any case, thank you very much for watching. I am Blunty. Thank you as always to the patrons that are scrolling up above there, and I will catch you next time.